Hi everybody, my name is Nellie Smirno and I'm a self-compassion coach, and thank you so much for joining me on day one of my three-part video series called An Introduction to Self-Compassion. Thank you so much for being here. I think we're facing an epidemic of a lack of self-compassion towards ourselves. I think it's prevalent in Western culture. I think it's a silent type of epidemic that not that many people talk about. And it has to do with how we treat ourselves and how unkind we can be to ourselves. So today, what I would like to do is talk about the topic of self-compassion and get a little bit more into what it actually is. So one of the better ways to define self-compassion is to first talk about what exactly is compassion. Compassion is, for example, if we see someone on a street and we see that that person's suffering, the first thing that has to happen is we have to notice, because we could just walk by that person, right? Or we could just look at them and feel indifferent. But if we look and see that the person is suffering and notice that, that is one part of compassion. If we connect with that person and feel their suffering, that is the second component of compassion. And the third one is a desire within ourselves to alleviate that suffering. So not only do we feel empathy for that person, but there's a part of us that wants to alleviate that suffering. So when it comes to self-compassion, obviously it's exactly the same definition, but it's towards ourself. Unfortunately, what often happens is that in the moment, we don't necessarily realize that we're suffering. It's easier sometimes to notice it in other people, but not necessarily in ourselves. I've read a book by Kristin Neff called Self-Compassion, and I really enjoy her definition, how she defines it as to the three components. She's a researcher. She's been studying scientifically self-compassion over the last 10 years, and she's written about it, and I find some of her work very interesting. So, for example, one of the first components of self-compassion is mindfulness. So it's becoming aware of the suffering that's happening within us. The second part she refers to as common humanity. So the fact that there's many of us who are either experiencing the same type of situation and suffering as we are, or have in the past, or will in the future. So we're not the only ones. And the third component is an act of kindness. So an actual gesture of some sort that can initiate something that we're trying to do to alleviate the suffering. So those three elements together are how she defines self-compassion. And it's a definition that I like to work with. I connect with how she explains that, and I think it's true. I think that it makes a lot of sense. Sometimes I recount the story about the Dalai Lama. Oh, I'm going to backtrack a little bit. This lack of self-compassion that we have in the Western culture, I think it's very prevalent, but it's not necessarily something that's experienced in the world entirely. In Tibet, where the Dalai Lama came from, and in the Buddhist teachings, they do a lot of work and discussion, and a lot of thought is put in around the area of compassion and self-compassion. So it's very much part of their culture and taught from a very early age. There's a story where the Dalai Lama was being interviewed by Westerners, and he was being asked, what can you help us or teach us that would help us feel compassion for ourselves, or not loathe ourselves, or be unloving to ourselves. And the Dalai Lama wasn't really understanding, and he kept asking his translator or interpreter to explain, and they were going back and forth, and then he was explained what the question was, and then he asked the group how many people here feel that, you know, and basically everybody said that they did. And apparently I heard that he cried. He cried because he had to be explained this concept of unlovingness towards self, that he didn't even understand what that concept was. So when I heard that story, it made me realize that it's not necessarily something that's worldwide. It could be very much a type of learned behavior. So today we've kind of covered a little bit of what self-compassion is. And in the next video, I'm going to talk more about how it came to be that we're so hard on ourselves. Why is it that we can speak to ourselves internally in terms that we would probably not use on anyone? So we're going to look a little bit more into that. Why is it? Why are we still very much, in a way, addicted to it? Because if we know it, why do we keep doing it? So that's going to be discussed in the second video, which is the middle video of a 3-part series. So if you have any comments to add, I'd love to read them if you can add them below. And I promise that I'll respond to all of the comments. And I'm really looking forward to you joining me again on the next video. So thank you very much for your time, and I'll see you soon. Bye.